began as a headline buried beneath diplomatic jargon. An $82 million contract routed through USAID, quietly tied to a Clinton-backed foundation. The story should have faded into the fog of government paperwork. But then came the hearing. Chelsea's name was spoken aloud, the number read into the record, and laughter rippled across the dais as if no one dared take it seriously. That laughter didn't last. J.D. Vance leaned into his microphone and with one sentence, one revelation, he shocked the chamber into silence. Stay with us, and if you haven't yet, hit subscribe, because what unfolded next turned a quiet scandal into a confrontation no one expected. The Senate hearing room looked ordinary at first glance. Rows of mahogany desks polished to a gleam, nameplates lined across the dais, cameras perched like vultures along the back wall. But beneath the formality, the atmosphere buzzed with something sharper. Anticipation. For weeks, whispers of an $82 million USAID contract had spread. Rumors that the money flowed not to relief programs abroad, but into a network of organizations connected to the Clinton Global Initiative. By the time J.D. Vance walked in, the gallery was packed. Reporters leaned forward with notebooks half filled before the gavel struck. Staffers whispered nervously. Everyone knew the name Clinton, guaranteed headlines, but few expected it would land this squarely on Chelsea herself. When the chairman called the session to order, the first presentation sounded routine. Charts, acronyms, bureaucratic testimony about capacity building, and resource allocation. The room shifted restlessly. It looked like just another day of oversight theater. Then a senator read the line aloud. $82 million routed through USAID, awarded to a foundation directly overseen by Chelsea Clinton. A ripple of laughter moved across one side of the dais. Not all at once, not loud, but pointed. The kind of laugh that signals not humor, but disbelief. One staffer shook his head, smirking. A senator muttered, "Oh, here we go again," loud enough for the microphones to catch. J.D. Vance didn't laugh. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, his fingers steepled in front of him. He let the noise play itself out, the chamber convincing itself that the number, the name, the scandal were too absurd to matter. Then he leaned forward. The microphone picked up his voice. Calm, deliberate, cutting through the air. "Gentlemen," he said, "you can laugh at the number, you can laugh at the name, but the paper trail doesn't laugh back." The chuckles stopped instantly. The room stilled. He tapped a folder in front of him, its edges worn from handling. "I've read the contracts, I've seen the signatures, and unless the clerk's eyes are deceiving me, those signatures are real. The $82 million didn't vanish into abstraction. It landed in accounts, and those accounts bear the mark of one name you're pretending not to hear. Chelsea Clinton." The silence after his words was louder than the laughter had been. Reporters straightened in their seats, pens racing, cameras zoomed tighter. The gallery leaned forward. For the first time, the scandal wasn't a whisper. It was on the record. Spoken aloud, and J.D. Vance wasn't finished. The laughter stopped, but the resistance began. The chairman shifted in his seat, tapping his gavel softly as though to remind the chamber of decorum. "Senator Vance," he said, "please confine yourself to questions relevant to oversight, not speculation." But Vance didn't back down. He leaned into the mic, his voice steady. "Speculation. Mr. Chairman, there's nothing speculative about a contract number, an amount, and a signature. The contract lists USAID, the disbursement lists $82 million, and the foundation lists Chelsea Clinton as executive director." A ripple of murmurs spread across the gallery. Reporters' pens scratched furiously. The tension was no longer about laughter. It was about whether anyone dared confront the name head-on. A senator on the far side of the dais leaned forward, his voice clipped, attempting to break the rhythm. "Senator Vance, are you accusing Chelsea Clinton personally of wrongdoing? Or are you implying impropriety by association?" It was meant to corner him, to force a retreat, but Vance didn't flinch. He opened his folder, sliding a single page into view. The camera zoomed closer, clear enough to show a USAID letterhead at the top. "This isn't implication," Vance said. "It's an award notification, signed, sealed, delivered. and the grantee of record is a Clinton-linked foundation. The Clinton who chairs it is Chelsea. That isn't association. That's identification. The room stilled again. The senator across the dais shifted, lips pressed tight. AOC, seated as a committee member, tried to interject. Senator Vance, with respect, foundations do good work around the world. To suggest corruption simply because of a name. Vance's reply was cold, precise. Congresswoman, if $82 million vanishes into a black box of good work without audits, then we're not talking about charity. We're talking about laundering taxpayer trust. The words landed like a blow. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even the chairman's hand, still hovering over his gavel, hesitated. Donors, contractors, even diplomats had sat through these hearings before. But rarely had a senator spoken this plainly, naming names, placing responsibility directly at the feet of one of America's most powerful families. Another member leaned forward, his tone half warning. Senator Vance, you're walking close to the line here. This committee does not exist to conduct partisan witch hunts. Vance turned his gaze slowly toward him, then back to the microphone. His voice lowered, forcing the room to lean in. A witch hunt is when you chase shadows. This is a signed document, a contract number, a dollar figure, and a name. Shadows don't leave signatures. The silence returned heavier than before. Even those who opposed him didn't interrupt immediately. The words had pinned them. For the first time, Chelsea Clinton's name wasn't a shield of untouchability. It was the centerpiece of the hearing. And Vance was pressing forward. The scandal wasn't in Vance's words. It was in USAID's own. He reached back into his folder, pulling out another page, this one thicker, stamped with the unmistakable watermark of an official audit summary. The room shifted again, every eye watching as he placed it flat on the desk. Colleagues, he began, his tone sharp but steady. We are told this $82 million grant was routine, above board, part of a larger humanitarian mission. That's the claim, but USAID's own Inspector General doesn't agree. The chamber stirred uneasily. Vance lowered his eyes to the page and read slowly, his voice carrying with each word. The agency failed to verify deliverables prior to disbursement. Subrecipient expenditures could not be traced to documented outputs. Accountability mechanisms were deemed insufficient. The words landed with weight, not speculation, not rhetoric, a contradiction straight from USAID's own audit, proof that the funds had been paid out with no measurable return. Reporters scribbled furiously, one turned to another and whispered, "That's the quote." The microphones caught just enough of it to ripple through the chamber. Across the dais, a senator tried to cut in. Senator Vance, these are bureaucratic oversights. They happen all the time in large programs. To single out Chelsea Clinton here is irresponsible. Vance looked up, his expression calm but unyielding. Oversight? An $82 million oversight routed to a foundation led by the daughter of a former president and Secretary of State? If this were any other family name, you would be calling it fraud. But because it's Clinton, you call it an oversight. The blow landed, the chamber froze again. AOC leaned forward, her tone sharp. So your position is that Chelsea Clinton personally diverted funds? Vance shook his head slightly, his voice dropping lower, colder. My position is simpler. USAID disbursed $82 million without proof. That money landed in a Clinton foundation. And when the Inspector General says the outputs don't exist, we don't need to invent theories. We just need to read. He tapped the page once for emphasis, the sound of paper against wood echoing louder than it should have. The contradiction was complete. USAID's glossy public claim of humanitarian progress now stood side by side with its own internal admission of failure. And at the center of that contradiction sat Chelsea Clinton's name. The panel went quiet. Reporters' pens filled the silence. Even the chairman leaned back, his gavel untouched, watching. Vance folded the page carefully, sliding it back into the folder as though the act itself carried weight. His voice, quieter now, finished the strike. When oversight stops at paperwork, corruption doesn't have to hide. It just has to wait for the laughter to fade. The silence in the chamber was suffocating. No one laughed this time. The laughter had vanished. What filled the chamber now was doubt. For the first half hour, J.D. Vance had been treated as if he were staging theater, a politician looking for headlines. But once the Inspector General's words were read into the record, the dynamic changed. The room that had smirked at the Clinton name now leaned forward, listening not with ridicule, but with unease. A senator on the opposite side of the dais cleared his throat. His tone was measured, not mocking. "Senator Vance, if what you're suggesting is true, then this committee has failed its oversight role. But surely you're not implying the funds simply disappeared." Vance turned a page in his folder, his movements slow, deliberate. He didn't rush to speak. "Disappeared? No, Senator, they were dispersed. What disappeared were the deliverables. The very projects we were told would justify this grant. Schools, clinics, infrastructure. None of them materialized in the form promised. That's not me talking. That's USAID's own admission." The words carried a heavier weight now. The earlier chuckles were gone. The only sounds were the faint hum of cameras and the scratch of pens racing across paper. One member leaned toward his microphone. "So you're saying the Clinton Foundation, or its affiliates, took the money and failed to deliver?" Vance looked up, his gaze steady. "I'm saying we allowed $82 million to be sent into a fog without proof of what it built. And at the center of that fog is a foundation run by Chelsea Clinton. If it's innocent, then let's see the receipts. But if we can't see them, then we don't get to laugh it away." The panel shifted. For the first time, heads nodded. Small, subtle, but visible. The ridicule had cracked. Now came hesitation, the slow realization that defending the indefensible could backfire in full view of the cameras. AOC tried again, her voice louder, sharper. "Senator Vance, this is reckless. You're attacking a private citizen based on incomplete documents. This isn't proof of corruption. It's proof of paperwork delays." Vance leaned slightly forward, his tone calm but cutting. "Delays? Congresswoman, this audit is dated 2 years after the disbursement. How long do we wait for results before we stop calling it a delay? 3 years? A decade? Taxpayers don't live on excuses. They live on outcomes. And the outcome here is nothing." The gallery stirred, whispers carrying through the rows. A reporter muttered, "That'll lead the story," as he scribbled faster. Even the chairman, who had tried to rein Vance in earlier, no longer interrupted. He sat back, his gavel untouched, watching the shift unfold. Vance let the silence hang again, then delivered the line that deepened the turn. "If Chelsea Clinton's foundation can't show where the money went, then the burden isn't on me for asking. It's on them for laughing." The panel froze. AOC's lips pressed into a thin line. Other members avoided her gaze. The laughter that had once unified the dais now looked reckless, dangerous. The chamber had begun to turn, and the cameras were capturing every second of it. The words were no longer just in the record. They were on every screen. The chamber was still, but outside its walls, something had already shifted. A reporter in the back checked his phone, then blinked. The clip was live. A 30-second cut of J.D. Vance reading from the Inspector General's report and tying the $82 million directly to Chelsea Clinton's foundation. The caption beneath it was brutal. "Vance oversight doesn't laugh. It audits." Within minutes, the clip spread across Twitter. Commentators stitched it with their own shocked reactions. Headlines appeared on news alerts, and staffers whispered frantically to one another in the gallery. The scandal had left the hearing. It was already a national story. Inside the chamber, the shift was palpable. Panelists knew the cameras weren't just broadcasting anymore. They were capturing history that would replay on loop. The stakes were no longer procedural. They were viral. AOC leaned forward, her voice sharper than ever. "Senator Vance, you're grandstanding. You're weaponizing bureaucracy to smear a private citizen. This is reckless and dangerous." But even as she spoke, the control booth cameras lingered on Kennedy's calm face. The memo and audit laid flat on the table in front of him. The contrast was unmistakable. Her voice, heated, his posture, steady. Viewers at home would see it instantly. Vance didn't raise his tone. He let her finish, then answered with surgical calm. "Reckless is laughing at $82 million missing. Dangerous is pretending the rules don't apply when the last name is Clinton. The sentence was clipped instantly. Another clip birthed for social media. Phones buzzed throughout the gallery. Staffers showed each other screens filled with comments. Finally, someone said it. He's not yelling, just reading. And it's devastating. The chairman's gavel tapped once, a hollow sound against the wood. Order, he said, but it was too late. Order belonged to the feed now, not to the dais. Donors, lobbyists, operatives outside the room were already texting, already calling, already panicking. The story had escaped containment. Vance leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply looked toward the cameras, his expression unreadable but unflinching. The moment had left his control, but he knew it didn't need him anymore. For years, hearings like this had ended in procedural haze, stories buried beneath jargon. But not this time. This time, the clip had escaped, carried by the very cameras meant to contain it. When words failed, faces told the truth. The hearing room had transformed. 30 minutes earlier, it was a stage for laughter, a place where the Clinton name drew chuckles instead of questions. Now the air was thick, the panel subdued, every shift of posture exposing what no one wanted to say aloud. Chelsea Clinton wasn't in the room, but her shadow was. Every mention of her name tightened jaws, straightened backs, and silenced tongues. The power of her family's legacy had always been enough to shield. Tonight, under J.D. Vance's calm precision, that shield looked cracked. A senator who had smirked earlier now avoided Vance's eyes entirely. He shuffled his papers with needless repetition, trying to look busy, but failing to hide the tension in his brow. Another rubbed his temple, whispering something to his aide, his face pale under the chamber lights. AOC, who had carried the loudest voice in opposition, sat rigid. Her smirk was gone. Her pen tapped against the desk, fast, relentless, betraying the frustration in her silence. When she finally spoke, her words lacked the bite they carried before. Senator Vance, this is not a trial. This is oversight. Vance didn't move. His reply was level, quiet, devastating. Oversight means seeing. Tonight we saw $82 million vanish on paper, and we saw laughter replace accountability. That's not oversight. That's complicity. The panel froze. No one interrupted him. In the gallery, reporters scribbled notes not just of words, but of expressions. Faces tight, panel visibly uneasy, laughter gone. Cameras lingered on close-ups, furrowed brows, lips pressed thin, eyes cast downward. One member leaned toward his microphone, but instead of a jab, he muttered, "No further questions." It was routine language, but his tone gave it away. This wasn't routine. It was retreat. The chairman himself, who had tapped his gavel multiple times earlier, now sat back, hands folded, saying nothing. Even he knew that silence was safer than speaking. And then came the tell. AOC leaned toward her aide, whispering urgently. The aide slid a folder toward her, but she didn't open it. The cameras caught the gesture. Someone searching for a lifeline, but unwilling to touch it under the lights. J.D. Vance didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He sat calm, steady, letting the silence settle like dust on marble. The contrast was unmistakable. One man unshaken, a panel unraveling in plain view. For the viewers at home, no further evidence was needed. The scandal wasn't just in the documents. It was in the faces of those who could no longer laugh. The chamber began with laughter. It ended with silence. For 35 minutes, senators had tried to wave off the $82 million USAID scandal as exaggeration. They chuckled at the number, smirked at the Clinton name, and dismissed the audit as paperwork noise. But J.D. Vance had sat steady, methodical, stripping away every excuse. Now, in the final moments, the laughter was gone. All that remained was silence, the kind that cameras capture and history keeps. Vance leaned forward, his folder now closed. He didn't need another page. His voice was calm, deliberate, every word falling with the weight of stone. "Colleagues," he said, "you can dismiss me. You can dismiss the questions. But you cannot dismiss $82 million missing from the record. And you cannot dismiss the name written on the grant. The American people will see what you laughed at tonight, and they will not laugh with you." The line froze the room. AOC looked down at her papers. The senator who had smirked earlier leaned back, lips pressed tight. The chairman shifted uneasily in his chair, but he didn't raise the gavel. No one moved to answer. Vance delivered his closing strike. Mockery fades. The money trail does not. He pushed the microphone back, folded his hands, and sat silent. The room, built for speeches, carried nothing but stillness. The duel was finished. Was J.D. Vance right to call out Chelsea Clinton by name in the $82 million USAID scandal? Or did he go too far? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you missed our last story, AOC laughs at Kennedy. His comeback stops the laughter. Go watch it now. Don't forget to subscribe because the next confrontation will be even bigger.